What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another Angle of Pursuit podcast, your fantasy football, sports betting, and NASCAR home here at fakepigskin.com. I'm your host, Kyle Robert. You follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. With me once again, it's Brian Twining. Brian, we have a football season approaching, or so I've been told.
Yes, it is coming quick, and I am ready to find the lint in my pockets to get betting on this season.
Yes, as I mentioned, we are your NASCAR home. We talk NASCAR each and every week. We're your fantasy football home. We've been helping get you set for your upcoming drafts. But today we're talking betting. Today we're talking our three best bets for the upcoming NFL season. Brian and I are all over the board this week. We're talking MVP. We're talking win totals. We're talking player props. But Brian, before we dive into all that, make sure that if you are enjoying what we're doing, you mash that thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe. We're going to be here all season talking fantasy, talking bets for the weekend, talking all the good stuff. As always, we are the Angle of Pursuit. But before we dive in, before we tell you odds, before we tell you our best bets, make sure you guys shop these lines.
Oh, yeah.
Brian and I were doing our research, and we find stuff we like. And Brian's like, where'd you see that? I didn't see that number here. And I'm like, okay, I went here and this is what I found. So obviously, depending on where you live, you're going to have options of certain options and other ones you're not going to. But shop around, especially when it comes to some of the stuff like player props. You might find that if you like the over, you can find a certain player for a touchdown, 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns less. If you like an MVP or rookie of the year or whatever, you might find a little extra value if you can look around. So especially for some of these longer term things, like obviously if you're betting on the same book every single week and like you want to keep your money there, totally get it. But if you're looking long term, if you have the ability to go to Atlantic City or Vegas or Tahoe, or if your state legalized betting, something Brian and I won't be able to probably take advantage of for a long time. But
thanks a lot, California.
It's all right. I hop in the car, I go to Nevada. It's all good. So make sure you shop around. We're going to tell you our lines. We're also going to tell you where we found them, so you guys can check it out and see that we're not making numbers up and not doing all that stuff. So without further ado, let's do it, Brian. These are our NFL best bets for the 2020 season. Now, these are all predicated on having a full season. We'll see if that actually happens, but here we go. Brian is all over the Pittsburgh Steelers over 9 wins. Brian, we were talking about this before the show started and kind of just this division in general.
Mm-hmm.
But talk to me about your Steelers love and why you're going to be targeting them over 9 wins.
One of the main reasons why I'm all over Pittsburgh this season is the fact that they were a mediocre team last year and finished the season at 500. They were 8-8. And you would ask, okay, what makes you think that they're going to go over that same win total? When you look at the players that they had to use in order to get to that 8-8 record, I mean, we're talking about a guy named Duck, Mason Rudolph, who couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. They played, over 33% of their games without do everything back James Conner. Juju Smith-Schuster, who was going into last season supposed to be the breakout superstar on that team, missed over a quarter of the season. And then, the aforementioned quarterback situation where Roethlisberger missed all but 1.5 games last year, and this team was still able to muster eight victories. And within those 8 losses, only 3 of them were by double-digit or 2 possessions or more, and with one of those coming to the Ravens in the last week of the year by 18. The other game they played against the best team in the division, the best team in the NFL at the time, was the Baltimore Ravens. They lost to them in overtime with Mason Rudolph at the helm. Like, this team had a top 5 defense last year. Most of those guys are returning this year. We get another season with that elite pass rush and Minkah Fitzpatrick now fully immersed into that defensive scheme. On all accounts, Roethlisberger is back to his old self. I mean, we have even Roethlisberger coming out saying his arm strength is surprising to himself. Juju is healthy. Connor is healthy. Deontay Johnson is coming into his second year. He looks explosive on the outside. They added Kyle's favorite tight end of all time, Eric Ebron, who even, regardless of what his production actually is, the addition of a pass receiving tight end that they haven't seen there really since, Heath Miller's early stages of his career, on top of the two guys on the outside with Connor fully healthy and that defense. That's before I even go into the beginning of their season, where four of their first 6 games are at home, albeit probably without fans. But their 2 road games are to the Giants and the Tennessee Titans, who, we're not really sure what we're going to see with the Titans offense this year. That's
I can tell you
before they
exactly
even get
what
to
we'll
play the
see.
Ravens.
Handoff, 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 handoff.
Yeah.
Ryan Tannehill bomb. Handoff, 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 handoff.
Yeah, I just don't know what there isn't to love about the Steelers defense. Their schedule is extremely favorable. They get the Bengals twice, who, although we really like what the potential is with that offense, that defense is going to be abysmal. They have a rookie quarterback who's going to see things out of Pittsburgh that he's never seen before. Their first divisional game is a home game to Cleveland, who, even though they're going to be much improved, again, it's in Pittsburgh. They get to play Washington. They play Jacksonville. I just don't see a world where this team is not easily getting to 9 wins and potentially 10-11 to even compete for the division title.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you. I like this team quite a bit, and we've talked about it on like all of our fantasy shows in terms of you can't judge this team based upon what we saw last year, especially for fantasy. Like if with no quarterback, with Duck and Mason, like that sounds like either a legal team or like injury lawyers or something.
Yeah.
Duck and, yeah. Anyways, but Big Ben taking back the reins, even if it's not for a long time, if it's 1 season, 2 seasons, whatever. But for this season alone, I think he's going to be great, and I think has the potential to have a really good season. I think this is a team that can win 10 and 11 games, as you mentioned. In terms of the division odds, the Ravens are minus 225, which, granted, they were incredible last year. Their defense got better. They're priced that way for a reason, but the Steelers at plus 350 feels like value. We'll see what Cleveland and Cincinnati are. I feel like both could be better than we expect, and the Steelers could still win 9 or 10 games. I feel like 9 is kind of their baseline, and then 10 or 11 is very real. James Conner, Juju, Deontay Johnson. You said, added Eric Ebron. I think a full year of Minka Fitzpatrick. I think this is a number I like quite a bit as well. All right, so time for my first best bet, and this is kind of cheating, but it's my show, so I'm gonna do whatever I want. I like Matt Ryan and I like Josh Allen, both at 50-1 to win the NFL MVP. And these odds are per DraftKings Sportsbook. We'll start with Ryan, who, I feel like we've talked about the Falcons like we're talking about the Steelers in terms of, like, I think the Falcons offense could be the best in football. And MVP is a weird thing where not only does your team have to be good, but you also kind of have to outdo some of the expectations of people. Like it's not necessarily a reaction to like what you did versus the field. It's more of a what did we expect and what did you actually do? Because if Patrick Mahomes comes out and has an awesome season and is 12-4 and throws for 4,600 yards and has 40 touchdowns, like no one's going to give him the MVP award because that's kind of what we expect. Obviously, if he goes 5,055 again, then here comes the MVP trophy. But the last 2 seasons, we've seen Mahomes step forward in a big way, and we've seen Lamar step forward in a big way. And obviously, Matt Ryan, we've seen him at his best, and he's a guy that's kind of been every other year it works out. And we got Calvin Ridley ready to have a huge season. We got Julio. They added Todd Gurley. All of a sudden, if this team is 11-5 in a division where obviously New Orleans is probably the class, but we have major questions about what Carolina is. we'll see what Tom Brady is as a Buccaneer. Like I feel like the Buccaneers win total is the one thing I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole.
No.
Because I could see that team being 5-11. I could see that team being 13-3. I could see that team being 8-8. Like I think there's one of the widest ranges for any team in the NFL, just based upon like if everything clicks, they're 14-2, 13-3, running away with the NFC. Awesome. I could see Brady being hurt and things going horribly. That being said, I think the Falcons have some pieces. Obviously, last year was a massive disappointment. If they're back in the playoff talk, if they're back in the among the best teams in the NFC talk, if they're in Matt Ryan carried us to 4,700 yards, 45 touchdowns. Julio had a monster year. Todd Gurley was a big factor. Like I think that makes a ton of sense. Now, Josh Allen, I think, fits more into the Mahomes Lamar bucket where he could take a huge step forward. Obviously, the Bills made the playoffs last year, so that makes things a little more interesting. But like the addition of Stephon Diggs, and they have Moss and Singletary, they have that team's kind of built where if all of a sudden Josh Allen puts up a monster season and still has the rushing and has a Lamar-esque season, I could totally see him winning the MVP award. Maybe even if the Bills only go 11-5 or 12-4, and which seems crazy, but like in their division where the Patriots are not Tom Brady and the Patriots anymore, we'll see what they are. The Jets are still the Jets. We'll see what the Dolphins are. Like obviously the Dolphins were much better last year than we expected, but the first month and a half of the season, they were an absolute train wreck, allowing 50 points to the Ravens. So, we'll see how it kind of bangs out. But I feel like at 50-1, I feel like both these numbers by the time we're approaching Thanksgiving are going to be at least half. And I feel like at the end of the season, you could easily be holding a ticket, the potential winner if you have both these tickets.
Yeah, I love both these calls, as we'll see with my next one. I talk about one of these guys, and in terms of Matt Ryan, it's his potential as the MVP is the fact that we've seen him put up that monster season for an extremely successful team, and like you said, this division with Tampa Bay, there's so much uncertainty with what we're really going to see out of them. I mean, like you said, you could potentially see the Buccaneers going 11-5, 12-4, led by Tom Brady without all those interceptions, or we could see a subpar 500 team just because they just didn't mesh well, and then we don't know what we're getting out of Carolina. I like this division. To me, is going to be the highest scoring division in all of the NFL. I just see a ton of shootouts here, leading to a lot of points scored by every team, and Atlanta, and the fact that the guy that we love the most there in Atlanta, the biggest addition of the NFL offseason, and Hayden Hurst, adding him, no offense to Austin Hooper, but, Hayden Hurst, Todd Gurley adding to that, even though Todd Gurley's not the Todd Gurley of old, just having that threat of that name in the backfield is going to open up a lot of things for the passing game in Atlanta. They still have Dirk Cutter, who still wants to throw the ball 65, 70% of the time, no matter what he says about the amount of touches for Gurley. And then on the other side with Josh Allen, we saw him improve last year. Mm-hmm. He only had 20 passing touchdowns, but we saw him improve his running game. We saw him improve his efficiency in the passing game. And now they have one of the best route runners in the NFL in Stephon Diggs, who's going to create a ton of separation, which for the inaccuracy of Josh Allen will open up a lot more for completions rather than having to throw in those tight windows leading to knockdown passes or incompletions.
Yeah, and we saw Lamar Jackson, I think is a great idea because we had huge question marks about what he could be as a passer. And obviously from year 1 to year 2, he stepped forward in a big way. Obviously, if you want to stay with the year 1 to year 2 trend, you could look at Kyler Murray, but his number is so much shorter. Like I wouldn't fault anyone who went there, but you're looking at 15 or 20 instead of 50. And I think you could make a similar case in terms of evolves as a passer, still has the rushing ability. They get another dynamic weapon. Adding Stephon Diggs could be huge. And all of a sudden, Josh Allen looks like a better quarterback because he has legit weapons. And obviously, yes, he does throw some YOLO balls. He does do stupid things like on Thanksgiving where he's throwing the option to nobody against the Cowboys. But I
and and I think the most important aspect of finding an MVP candidate is the fact that Buffalo right now are the favorites to win the AFC East. And
yeah.
most of the time, the MVP comes out of a team who makes the playoffs, who kind of surprises. And although they're predicted to win the division, we're not expecting this team to compete for tops in the AFC standings. And if he were to lead Buffalo to that 11-5, 12-4 record with that defense that they have and the additions on the offensive side of the ball that they have, you're looking at an even increased chance that he could be an MVP candidate.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's move it forward. Let's talk about the bet you alluded to because I'm 1,000% on board. I'm going to the window with any and all Matt Ryan props this year. And I don't usually like this guy. Like, I mean, he's fine. He's one of those guys for me that is either way overrated and people talk about him like he's Patrick Mahomes, or he's coming off a mediocre year and he's significantly underrated. I ping pong with his value, and just to kind of understand some of his numbers, right? So last year, this is a guy that threw for 4,400 yards and 26 touchdowns. His over under is 26 and a half. The year before, 49, 24, and 35 touchdowns. The year before, 40, 95, and 20 touchdowns. The year before that,
49, 44, and 38.
Yeah, it's almost like he's every other year. And he's either a top 5 option or a top 15 option in fantasy. And when he's whenever he's the year before, he tends to bounce back in the other direction. So talk to me about Matt Ryan and why we're putting all of our bankroll on this, because 26 and a half, like I feel like he could have that by Thanksgiving.
I don't know about by Thanksgiving, but like you mentioned, I mean, he is the San Francisco Giants of the NFL as a player. Like this dude, every even year, he puts up ridiculous numbers. I mean, going all the way back to 2013, which was the first season after he set career highs, 4,500 yards, 26 touchdowns. 2014 then, 4,700 yards, 28 touchdowns, an increase in touchdowns, an increase in yards. And then 15, he actually decreased in yards, decreased in touchdowns. And then a 4,000 yard increase and an 18 or 17 touchdown increase, like we were talking about. So for him, like I'm expecting to see a positive touchdown regression of at least 5-6 touchdowns out of this offense from him with his arm. And there were so many times last year watching those Falcons games where their offense just got so bogged down near the goal line because they refused to throw the ball to the biggest target in the NFL in the end zone, and Julio Jones. If they can just somehow get their heads out of their you-know-whats and just start throwing jump balls to this guy, like we could see another 35-plus touchdown season from Matt Ryan. And like I said, talking about his potential as an MVP, the addition of Todd Gurley, especially in those red zone situations, is just going to increase the availability of his wide receivers down the field, with teams now having to actually defend against the possibility of runs in that area, which I think they were like last in the NFL in rushing attempts inside the red zone. Like this team they want to chuck it all over the field. And if we're looking at a guy with trends, 26 and a half to me is, like you said, like first 10 games of the year, he should probably reach that amount. And going back to one of the points that we made before even talking about our bets here and searching around at books. So Matt Ryan is the perfect instance of this. We're talking about him at over 26 and a half touchdowns on FanDuel at minus 102. So almost even odds. If you look at what DraftKings Sportsbook is offering it at, it's actually at 27 and a half at worse odds at minus 110. So this is what we're alluding to. Like you need to shop around because there are way better values out there. And this is almost a guarantee. Like I'm going to smash bet this at this book, because it's almost a ridiculous number to even fathom.
Yeah, and that's why, like, that could be, especially at the end of the season. Like, even if he has a little slower start, if we're talking about 27 versus 29, like he needs two more touchdowns to get to that other number, 28. Like he needs to do more. So, like, if you can find better or the same odds and get a touchdown or two or three less, like that, it makes so much sense. And especially for ones you're going to have to wait for 16 games anyways, if you can find ways to make bets, if you can find ways to get to Vegas or wherever you go to make your bets, and find a little extra value, I highly recommend doing that. Brian, let's keep it rolling. Let's talk some NFL offensive rookie of the year. Unlike NFL MVP, this has been a little more like, oh, quarterback, running back, receiver. They open it up a lot more. Joe Burrow is the huge favorite at plus 225, and for the right reasons. Obviously, number one pick. Think that Bengals offense can look pretty solid. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, like, if he has that season, like he could be in the conversation, but there's so many mouths to feed in Kansas City, that I'm not sure I would go there. Tua Tagovailoa, though, is very interesting to me. Obviously 8-1, but he has a path to be a starter early. He has a path to take a Dolphins team that wasn't very good last year, came on at the end of the year. They still have Devontae Parker. They're getting Preston Williams back. They have Mike Gesicki. They have Matt Breida and Jordan Howard at running back. Like, he's got weapons. Got an improved offensive line. He's got a team trending in the right direction. You're really just banking on him playing. If he can play and be on the field for, I don't know, 14 games, I think he's got a very good shot at winning this award. I think especially if he finishes strong, like we've seen before, where it's not necessarily the guy that starts the fastest. It's the guy that kind of makes the most noise and builds the case towards the end of the year. So if the Dolphins say Fitzmagic starts the first 6 games, they're 1-5, 2-4. They make the switch, and all of a sudden they go 8-3 down the stretch, or whatever it happens to be, and Tua's playing great. I could totally see him come in and snatch the award, because especially your first season, in like the Bengals in terms of fantasy could be fun, but they have huge questions of offensive line. They're not going to be very good. As we've talked about with that kind of division, like Baltimore's obviously there. We expect the Steelers to be really good. I think Cleveland could take a step forward and kind of be a team that we kind of, a lot of people expected to see this year, where in the AFC East, it's a lot more wide open with New England not being what we expect. So if he's able to kind of figure it out as he goes along and puts up a solid season and has all these weapons to distribute the ball to at 8-1, like, I feel like he starts, that number gets cut in half. I feel like, by the end of the season, if you want to get on that train, it's going to be 2.5. And that's what I always like to look at. Like, do you win bets that way all the time? No. But if you get of the value going,
Yep.
you're finding that you're holding those tickets, more often than not, it's going to pay off in the long run. So it's all about, it's a long play. And anytime you're betting something that's going to take a full season, you want to get those odds. You want to get that value, because, at the end of the season, when it's 1.5-1 and it's tight with Joe Burrow, you were on the right side. You did the right thing, even if Joe Burrow ends up taking home the award.
Yeah, because like you're saying right there, is that you want to be on the right side of the odds in this case. And in terms of like live betting, for instance, I do a lot of the live betting, and I'm always searching for a favorite going into a game that is, say, losing going into the fourth quarter, or into the second half of a game.
Mm-hmm.
And that they're going to make a comeback, or they're going to see the field at some point. And
yeah,
that Miami, by all accounts, like, as much as Ryan Fitzpatrick is Fitzmagic, like he's not the long-term answer there. And if they get off to, say, an 0-3 start, 0-4 start, which is highly likely, eventually you're going to have to get Tua in there. And they're not, the cupboard is not barren as far as talent goes on the offensive side of the ball, with Devontae Parker, with Preston Williams coming back, Mike Gesicki, the additions of both Jordan Howard and Matt Breida. So, like you're saying, an 8-1 start for this guy, I'd even be interested to see, because he's likely to start the season on the bench. Say we're 2 games deep and he hasn't seen the field yet. I would love to see what the live odds are as
Yep.
offensive rookie of the year. And if it drops, that would be a bet that I would be hammering.
Yeah. I mean, you could see maybe 10 or 12.
Yeah.
It's definitely a thing where I'd bet it and then look to reinvest.
Yes.
I am looking at the list. There is 2 names that stand out to me. DeAndre Swift, like the hype train got going, and now it seems like he's having a little bit of camp issues. But there's a clear path to him just carry on, just not being the answer. And I want to carry on to be the guy, but like looking at his production and lack of field time and DeAndre Swift's upside, that's a guy that could steal the show, make a lot of noise, and be really interesting. Uh, I'm gonna stand for my guy J.K. Dobbins, but I worry about that offense in terms
Uh,
of just because so much goes through Lamar. Is it going to be open enough where even if J.K. takes over for the last 12 games and rushes for 1,000 yards, is that going to be enough to get him the award come season's end?
Okay, I'm so glad you brought up your boy J.K. Dobbins, because I was not on board early in the fantasy season. He was a guy that I was kind of downplaying, and over the last couple weeks, everyone has that moment. Everyone has that epiphany when you start to realize, like, damn, this guy is just stepping into a tremendous opportunity here. And J.K. Dobbins is, I think, that guy. I mean, you're looking at a player who's likely taking over for Gus Edwards as the number 2 guy, and more than likely, I think, with the rumors that we're hearing out of camp, is probably going to see closer to a 50-50 share with Mark Ingram. And if we're looking at that, Ingram saw 200 attempts to Gus Edwards 133. And if we see even a slight increase to that, JK's gets anywhere near 150 rushing attempts. We saw Edwards put up 700 plus yards, although he didn't get the touchdowns. That was more Ingram's thing. But by everything we're hearing, JK is the most explosive and the most athletic guy in that backfield. And I think by season's end, we're looking at Dobbins as being the lead guy. I'm looking at possibly 8 to 10 touchdowns, close to 800 plus rushing yards. Like,
welcome to the dark side, my friend. It's so nice over here.
One thing I will say, even being a Michigan fan, like, one thing I've always respected about Ohio State is they churn out those running backs like nobody's business. And I mean, Zeke, JK, Carlos Hyde has been in the league and been, good pretty much his entire career. Yeah, these guys, they're just built for the NFL.
So the thing I'll say, and this is something, if you go back and listen to our show since the draft, this has been my guy. I think Mark Ingram is this year's Gus Edwards, and I think J.K. Dobbins is this year's Mark Ingram. I think that shift happens quickly. Maybe it's week 4 or week 5, but I think it starts 60-40 with Ingram, and I think before the halfway point for sure. And I'm thinking even before then. And if you want to see Brian and I's fantasy breakout, difference maker, whatever you want to call it, flag plant guys, we're going to be recording that show soon. Our league winners. It's a little preview because J.K. Dobbins will make my list. J.K. Dobbins will be prominently featured, and will be a guy that helps people win fantasy trophies, and a guy that we're talking about, like Miles Sanders, heading into 2021. Because Miles Sanders was my guy last year, and it worked out. I'm hoping I can go back to back, nail the J.K. Dobbins call, and feel really good about things. But from a pure betting, like just in terms of betting, like those 2 numbers are really interesting to me, 20 and 25. Obviously, I like to lean at the quarterback because I think there's so much goes through them. But those offenses could both be really good in Detroit and in Baltimore. And they could both be in the conversation. And if they play up to their ability in offenses that can produce, those numbers are also going to drop significantly. And they'll be in that, like Jonathan Taylor right now is 8-1. Like, I think Jonathan Taylor has a really good shot at winning the Rookie of the Year, but I think he is a lot closer to the Swift and Dobbins than he is to Burrow and Tua.
Yeah, and not to interrupt you, but again, that just goes to what we always talk about when you have 2 guys that are very similar in terms of what they could potentially produce. And you're looking at the huge difference in odds. Like, why would I place a bet on Jonathan Taylor at 9-1 or 10-1, who we think a guy like JK or DeAndre Swift could produce similar numbers, and they're at double the odds that you're getting in return. Like,
yeah. So take that $100 you were going to put on Jonathan Taylor 8-1, put 50 on Swift, 50 on Dobbins, and then
double your you double your chances and you double your winnings if you hit.
Let's keep it rolling. Let's go with another guy that I can almost guarantee you'll be prominently featured in the fantasy league winners. A guy that I've already written a full article about, and another guy that I brought Brian to the dark side on. Brandon Cooks over 850 receiving yards. What? I mean, this is he's going to get hurt and miss time to go under, right? Like I don't see how he plays 14 or 15 games and doesn't go flying over this total.
We talked about him so many times on here, and he's a guy who I've also been a backer of in previous seasons. As I remember his sophomore year with New Orleans, like his little arrow celebration. I just absolutely love this dude. And for me to hear all these people, and again, this is something we've mentioned this before, talking about his injury worries. The dude he's never had injuries prior to last season. Like, so for people to think that he's injury prone, I just don't know where they're getting their information from. And these are probably the same people who, again, are talking about they want to draft Will Fuller because he's now the number one wideout in Houston when that guy's never played over 11 games or something in an entire season. So
he's played 28 games of his last
I think it's 5 years, 4 or 5 years.
3 years. So 48. He's basically missed 20 games over the past 3 years.
And, I think so. That's just one of the reasons why Cooks is one of my favorite values in fantasy for betting, and to almost easily surpass this number here. I mean, you add the injury concerns of the other three guys that Deshaun Watson has on the outside, and the aforementioned Will Fuller, Kenny Stills, who can't stay on the field either, and Randall Cobb, who battled numerous injuries last year with Dallas and his previous stints with the Green Bay. And you add the fact that DeAndre Hopkins is now gone, freeing up 150 targets to this guy, and Cooks being out of those 4 wide receivers. I think Brandon Cooks offers the most versatility at the position. And I just think he and Deshaun Watson are going to find it really easy rapport developing fairly early on, as Cooks is just going to become he's got to become his favorite target there. Like, I just don't see a world where he's not seeing close to double-digit targets almost on a weekly basis, and we see him blow past this number, especially considering he's had over 1,000 yards in every season except for last year's injuries and his rookie year. So,
and this is a guy that's transitioned to new offenses and still been awesome.
Multiple times.
He's gone to New England and been awesome. He's gone to the Rams and been awesome. He's got Deshaun throwing the ball. Deshaun Watson might be the best quarterback he's ever had. I mean, in terms of getting it down the field, targeting him deep, being able to extend plays, and now Cooks is wide open and sprinting down the midfield. Like, he, as you mentioned, this is a guy that's shattered this total 4 years in a row before last year. Obviously, took a few bumps last year, didn't play as much, but I'm gonna be banging the Brandon Cooks drum all off season, which for me is really weird because I don't normally go after Brandon Cooks. Like, he's usually a guy that I think is overvalued and a guy that a lot of people think can do more than I expect, but he produces, he gets the volume, he's walking into a team that has 160 vacated targets, that, Randall Cobb's going to get some, and they're going to obviously get David Johnson work. But like, this is a guy that I wrote, if you go to Fake Pigskin, you could see all my breakdown, but I have him at well over 100 targets. I have him well over 1,000 yards. Like Matt Ryan, I'm just going to the window and betting the over on a lot of these props. And I like, it's so funny to me how one season can completely shift the narrative on a player.
But but that's the thing, is like, it's the injury season because it was so bad. Like, he barely had over 500 receiving yards, and like we're talking about Will Fuller, it's almost like the glamour effect of Will Fuller, who we've seen him have those huge games with 4 catches, 160 yards, and 3 touchdowns, but the next game he goes out and he puts up 2 for 30 and nothing. And, we're going to see a lot of that again.
He's going to have 2 or 3 monster games this year. 1 or 2 of them are probably going to be on national TV. Like I could see him coming out because I think they play the Chiefs on that first game on
Yeah,
Thursday
on
night,
Thursday. Yep.
and I could see him just going wild because the Chiefs secondary is awful, and that being 70% of his production for the year. Like I think if you like Will Fuller, you draft him, you play him in that game, and then you trade him
You
for
ship him off for as much
huge
as
value.
possible. Yes.
Brian, let me hit you with my last best bet before we get out of here. This one hurts a little bit. The Indianapolis Colts are going to win over 9 games. I mean, depending on where you look, it's between 115 and 120. I just put 117, kind of give you a midpoint. I don't understand this number. I think the Texans have a shot at being really, really bad this year. I think defensively they're going backwards. We'll see how many games JJ Watt can play. I think that offense will still be fine for fantasy, as I mentioned. Deshaun Watson will be fine, but there's a good chance that a few of those receivers could be out. Cobb could miss time. Fuller could miss time. Even if Cooks misses a game or two, I wouldn't be surprised. David Johnson, we'll see. Like I think when he's healthy, will be good. But I worry about the team. I worry about the way it's trending. I worry about Bill O'Brien just doing Bill O'Brien stuff. Jacksonville, like I mean, I was talking to you like Gardner Minshew is like 250 to 1 to win NFL MVP. Like if I like that just because I think if everything clicks there and DJ Chark is who we think he can be, maybe that's something that becomes a hell of a lot more interesting. But I don't expect Jacksonville to be good. I don't expect Houston to be good. I think the Titans are fine. I'm a little dubious. I'm also a Titans fan, so maybe I'm just being cautiously optimistic. I don't know. But I think adding Phillip Rivers, I think with this offensive line, I think the way the defense is trending, like if this team doesn't win 11 or 12 games, I'm going to be pretty shocked, to be honest. Like if I'm getting over 9, and so I just need them to get to 9, I feel like 2 wins against Jacksonville, a win against Houston, a win against Tennessee. You're already at 4. Then you just need to find 5 more. I think that's almost a lock. And then I think 10 or 11 wins is very, very likely. And even if you're laying a little extra juice to get the over 9 instead of 9.5 or 10, I'm taking that all day long.
Yeah, this is another one where we're looking at a team who was able to muster up 7 victories last year with Jacoby Brissett manning the backfield, and we saw him go down. Their defense performed admirably well. They battled a lot of injuries too. They were, I think, top 15 in total defense last year. They played a lot of close games early on, and then they kind of packed it in near the back end of the season. But like you said, the addition of Phillip Rivers, regardless of what I think about him and how much I just think he's just a psychopath quarterback who he just tries to fit balls into ridiculous places. I'm not so sure he's going to have to do that this year. I mean, I don't know if he's ever played on a team that's going to be as successful running the ball as this team is, even, and that's saying a lot, coming from a guy who played with LT I don't like calling him LT because that's Lawrence Taylor, but even a guy who played with LaDainian Tomlinson in the backfield, that 2-headed monster that we're going to see with Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack is going to be something to behold. I love the fact that we're hearing great things with him developing a tremendous rapport with T.Y. Hilton. That's his new Keenan Allen.
Paris he seems Campbell's trending up.
He loves your boy Trey Burton.
Trey Burton is going to be a thing this year. I'm telling you.
We're hearing a ton of great things about he and Trey Burton with Jack Doyle right now, batting a little bit of an injury bug. And that's not even factoring in the addition of Michael Pittman Jr., who is his new Vincent Jackson, Mike Williams, who will be huge in downfield throws for Rivers and one-on-one opportunities. Like you said, this is a division with Jacksonville, who's probably going to be amongst the worst teams in the NFL. Houston has, if not the worst, a bottom 5 defense. Yeah, again, the fact that they're at 9, which is 1 game over 500 in this division, is almost like stealing in terms of for a better. Like this is one of the closest things to a guarantee that I would see for the NFL season.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're looking at it from a counter perspective, you think the Titans, the Colts, and the Texans are all good, and they all are in that 500 range. I don't see that this year. I don't think that's the case. I think the Colts are clearly trending in one way. I think the Texans are trending in the other. And as much as I enjoyed last season with the Titans, I'm not optimistic that that's what we're going to see this year. And I think the win totals dictate that. So if the Titans go 8-8 or 9-7, and the Colts go, or the Texans go 7-9, and the Jags win 4 or 5 games, because a lot of mocks have them drafting Trevor Lawrence or another quarterback, Justin Fields. So clearly the people that are kind of developing those don't think Jacksonville is going to be great this year. Like, the wins are going somewhere, and I think Indy's going to get that. I think 5 or 6 in division wins, plus 3 or 4 more somewhere else. I think we're talking 9 wins is almost guaranteed, as you mentioned. Like, no bet's guaranteed, and don't go betting money you can't afford to lose on that. But of my 3 bets, I think this is my favorite. What's of the ones that you mentioned? Where's your favorite for the season?
For me, I think it's got to be the Steelers over 9. It's going to go with a win total. And I know it's a lot more difficult to predict team win totals because there's a lot more that has to go right for that particular team. But for all the reasons that I mentioned, and very similarly to what we're talking about with the Colts being like, you can't base it off what they did in the previous year. I just think Pittsburgh is one of those teams that the fact that they were able to get 8 wins with what they had last year just should kind of, I think their number this year probably should have opened closer to double digits. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it's actually hovered and or decreased on some books down to 9, I think it's probably the public betting based on what they saw last year. And I just think at 9, it's too good to pass up.
Yeah. The one thing I will say before we get out of here, if you like the Colts, but you're worried about that kind of 9, 10, 11 win, where they land, the Colts are plus 120 to win the division. So if you're kind of in the same mentality as me, is this is the best team, maybe they win, maybe they go 9-7, and you're not really super excited about them winning, them going over their total, but you think they can win the division. They're plus 120. So, I mean, I don't hate betting both of those, to be honest, but you can always look at teams you like in a little different way if you want to find a little extra value and still target them. As I've mentioned, if you are enjoying the show, make sure you mash that thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe. Let us know your best bet for the upcoming NFL season. Where's your money going? Who do you like? Or, what's your favorite win total, player prop, whatever? Drop them in the comments. Let us know. Hopefully you can help us win some money. We're always looking for new angles, new ways to win. So for Brian Twining, I'm Kyle Robert, and we'll talk to you guys next time.